Hello, wonderful humans of Beam Tribe and anyone in the TFC community that's watching this. Nick here in Ottawa, and in this video, I'd like to talk about how beam training might be the most powerful thing you can do to protect your ankle and to avoid future ankle sprains. So when I finished physio school, I worked as the physio director for a varsity university organization. And some of the teams I worked with were volleyball, basketball, and soccer, particularly girls soccer. And one of the most prevalent and heartbreaking injuries that I kept seeing was ankle sprains. Okay, chronic ankle sprains, ankle fractures, all of these kinds of things that seemed to me, these students were extremely amazing athletes, and yet they were spraining their ankles super frequently. And knowing what I know now, back then I was just doing what I was taught in school, which actually turns out was really ineffective. But knowing what I know now, and in terms of the mechanism of how the hip and the ankle play a role together, it makes a lot of sense that these athletes were spraining their ankles. They sat all day. They sat all day in chairs, or they sat at home studying, and then they went out and played their sport, most of which were jumping sports or high-speed cutting sports. And so the ankle just took a beating. And I've found through my personal physio practice and through just kind of working on it myself, that if you bulletproof your hip and train reactive hip stability, which I'll talk about in a sec, you can literally avoid ankle sprains. You can get into sketchy situations and rescue them very quickly so that instead of blowing out an ankle ligament, it ends up being nothing. So, crash course in ankle sprains. The biggest way people sprain their ankle is called an inversion ankle sprain, which means that the ankle inverts or goes inward like this. And so you end up tearing a lot of the ligaments here or damaging the peroneals. Peroneals are a muscle group that goes here, and if I go like this, you can actually see that big tendon there. It goes down, scoops behind my ankle bone, and attaches to the base of the fifth metatarsal. Now, what commonly happens is when you're going over on an ankle sprain, two things commonly happen. Either you go over completely and you tear the ligaments, or when you're halfway, your brain realizes this is not a good position, fires those muscles, and then sometimes you can actually avulse or pull off a chunk of bone from that peroneal tendon, or damage the peroneals. Now, when most people train to prevent ankle sprains, they look at the ankle. But no one seems to really be looking at the hip and training reactive hip stability. What I mean by that is when I'm in open kinetic chain, which means when my foot is in the air, this abduction of my hip does this. Now, closed kinetic chain is when your foot is touching the ground instead of floating around in the air. And the same muscles that do this in open kinetic chain do this in closed kinetic chain. So if I'm about to go over and sprain my ankle, my brain detects that's a sketchy ankle position and fires these muscles at my hip, boom, that happens. So it prevents me from going over. These muscles are significantly larger and have a bigger lever arm than the peroneals. And the way that you actually train that to happen quickly, because a lot of times it's just a matter of time. It's not a matter of the strength of the muscle. It's a matter of how quickly did your brain detect the bad position and react with a strategy that it knows works. Now, the beauty about beam training is that when you're on a balance beam, you're essentially facing this position where your ankle goes over here quite often. And so you're telling each time that happens and your brain tries to fire those muscles, it gets you back on. So if I'm here and I'm about to go over, my brain fires my hip muscles. And essentially what you're doing is putting in reps to train your brain to recognize the bad ankle position and fire the right muscles in a short period of time to stop you from going over. Reacting quickly is the difference between blowing out your ankle ligaments and being completely fine and getting even towards I've been in some really sketchy positions on barefoot hikes recently where probably a couple years ago my ankle would have just been blasted. But I was able to rescue it without even thinking because my brain had seen that position before, knew how to react quickly, and knew how to react with the right muscles. Okay? Now, it's not you can't use beam training to offset a full day worth of sitting, so that needs to be addressed. But what you can do, if you're someone who has chronic ankle sprains, who has really tight ankles, right? Because if your brain doesn't sense that your hip's doing its job, it's going to tighten everything around the ankle, and it gives you just less mobility around that joint. So if you have chronic ankle sprains, if you have tight ankles, training on a beam, training any way of training your balance is great. I think the beam does something specific because it's curved. It allows your ankle a lot of play in the lateral direction and trains your brain how to detect those bad positions and how to correct them very quickly. If you train these sketchy positions unintentionally by doing some play on the beam, it will help to bulletproof and develop strategies to protect your ankle during gameplay. protect it when you land, protect it when you cut. So hopefully that does a little bit to help improve your understanding of how your hip has a lot to do with preventing your ankles from getting sprained. When you sprain your ankles chronically, you lose some of that structural integrity from the ligaments, so you have to get it neuromuscularly. You have to get your brain recognizing positions and the muscles reacting quicker in order to make up for that lack of structural integrity from those scarred ligaments or from those previously torn and now sort of loosened ligaments. So train on a beam, prevent ankle sprains, tell your friends, and I hope that video helped. And like I said, if you have a friend that's always spraining their ankle, show them this. Maybe it'll make them curious to try stuff, and you can prevent ankle sprains. You just got to know how to do it. Ciao.